Well, things seem to kind of find, as you kind of probably hear, new normals. Oh, this is a new normal. And there's a frustrating thing about a new normal when you go, I don't like this new normal. Now, there's one thing when you find a new normal, you like it. Like, maybe you get a new car or something like that. You go, I like this new normal. This is a new house. I like this new normal. But when something happens, as is happening in our world, and we go, so is this the new normal? You go, I don't like it. And it's interesting is that it seemed like there was this valley, this divide in our world that was increasing. And there was people on two sides. There's people over here, and there's here, and then this divide just keeps on increasing. But as I'm trying to watch this thing develop, I go, it's not even a valley anymore. It's like a canyon. I picture like the Grand Canyon, and people are on all sides, all the way around the canyon. And so they may be on opposite sides on one topic, but then something else comes up, and they go, oh, well, yeah, we're together on that, but then we oppose this other side over there. And I go, so it's not the valley that's growing. It's not the two sides that are growing, but it feels like this canyon that is growing. And as the canyon grows, maybe a sinkhole would be a better analogy, but as that grows, is that the divide grows. And it's interesting is that if you talk with most people, they would agree with that. They go, yes. This gap is growing. We're not coming together. It's getting further apart. And so it's interesting. There's unity, and there may be only agreement on that one idea right now, is that there is a growing gap. There's a growing divide. And that may be the only thing that we agree on, because as soon as you talk about how do we move forward, what do we do to heal from this, how do we progress, then all of a sudden you get really very differing opinions and ideas about how this thing moving forward looks. And so we would agree with this idea that there's this gap, greatly disagree with how we move forward with this. And so for the last several weeks now, we've been looking at this idea of unity in the church, that we are one. And as we're going to talk about this morning, unity, by the way, does not mean conformity. You know, you all, like everybody acts the same, thinks the same. And it's not necessarily uniformity with the idea that everybody looks the same. So it's not this idea of conformity or uniformity where we all act and look just the same, or we're just Christian clones. But actually we're being unified, and as we're going to see this morning, unified in very diverse ways. And actually that's one of the beautiful things about the church, is that it can find unity in this diversity. And so a couple weeks ago, out of Ephesians 2, was this idea that Christ has come, and he came to tear down the walls of hostility, to unite that which was divided, right, and to build up his church. And so if what you do is as we look out in the world and we see the walls of hostility are back, then we go, somebody else built these. This wasn't Jesus, because what it tells us is that Jesus actually came not to eventually tear them down, but Jesus came and tore them down. And Jesus didn't come to eventually unite that which was divided. He actually came and united that which is divided. And so we want to be working with Jesus, which means that we are the same. We are tearing down the walls of hostility if somebody rebuilds them. We are uniting that which is being divided, and that we are building the church. And what we saw last week in Ephesians 4, and we're gonna step back up with that, is this idea that you need to walk in a manner that is worthy of your calling. And when he says this, he's saying to y'all, like Paul's saying, he's writing to the church in Ephesus, all of you guys together as one, you need to walk together in a manner that is worthy of your calling. And there's a way to do that that's unworthy, but I want you to do this in a way that is worthy. And he hits this like there's just one. There's one body, there's one spirit, there's one God, there's one Son, there's one faith, there's one baptism, one. You guys should be united in all of this And the reason why we broke out in verse 7, which we're going to pick up this morning, is because then he hits right to diversity. It's interesting how he does this. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, unity, unity, unity. And by the way, y'all are very different. And so if you have your Bibles open with me, we've got a lot of ground to cover this morning. We're going to start in chapter 4 of Ephesians, verse 7. So he just got done 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. One God and Father of all, who is over all, who is through all, and in all. Verse 7, but unity, 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 1, 1, 1. Verse 7, but grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. So, but grace was given to each of one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. So I want you to think about this for a second. Because what Paul has just said, he goes, there's one. There's one faith. There's one baptism, one Jesus, one Christ. There's one Father. There's one body. There's one. And by the way, you're different. But grace was given to each one of you, each one of us, according to the measures of Christ's gift. And so he goes there. By the way, this is a grace. This is not the grace of salvation. This seems to be, as he goes on, this is a grace of a gift. That God has given you a grace of a gift, as we're going to see later on here, is to serve the body. It's a ministry. It's interesting because we think that ministry is something they go, well, isn't that what we hired you to do, Josh? Aren't you? You do the ministry and we just come and we sit in it. You go, no. Actually, the idea of the body, as we're going to see here, is that it's actually all of us, all of you. He says each one of you. He doesn't just say, and to the pastors who are on staff, to those who are super talented and have been given special training. No, that's not what he says. But grace was given to each one of us, every one of us. Grace has been given to you. And as we're going to see, this is not the grace of salvation. This is a grace of Jesus' gift. And that gift is going to lead you to ministry. Now, it's interesting because most people don't think of grace in ministry. I'll tell you this, if you serve in ministry long enough, at some point grace becomes this burden. Like, oh, the grace of God is all over me today. Like, I got to go and I got to do this. I got to get this done. And it's interesting, even us as a church, like, and not just Northside, but generally, we talk about ministry as if it's this burden that's put upon you. But this idea that we say, like, it's a grace. But it's by God's grace that we get to serve him. It's by God's grace we get to serve his people. I mean, the worst thing that could happen for you or for me is that we just live lives that have no eternal value. We're not pouring into anything that has. We just live for the day. That's so tragic. And so ministry is this idea that God has given you this grace, and it says each according to the measure. So everybody gets it. Everybody gets the grace, but each according to the measure of Christ. Which in this idea is that it's different. You're going to get a different measure of this grace than I get. In other words, I'm going to have different responsibilities in ministry than you'll have. We're going to be in charge of different things. And so this is interesting because a lot of times we think that, even when we think about equality or being equal in the church, is that everybody can do everything. And I think that the Bible would really come against, and even Paul's writing here would really come against that idea that everybody can do everything. I mean, you think about this for a second, that the church is diverse and is to be diverse as a direct connection to Jesus giving his gifts. So actually, Jesus gives his gifts so that his church is diverse. This is what he's saying right here, is that each of you guys have received a grace. This is not salvation. This is a way in which you serve the community. And each of you is, but it's different. And it's different. And so there's this beautiful diversity in the church. There should be this beautiful diversity in the church. And this diversity is a direct result of Jesus giving out his gifts. Once again, that's why this is not conformity, this is not uniformity, but this is unity. Then he goes on in verse 8. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. In saying he ascended, what does it mean but that he also descended into the lower regions of the earth? He who descended is the one who also ascends far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. And so it's interesting that he says, he's like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. By the way, you guys are super different, and you're super different because Jesus has equipped you differently. He has given you different gifts. And then it goes into, this is a quoting a psalm, but this is a military psalm. This is about a military victory. It gives us this picture of Jesus entering in. The idea is that the victor of the war is entering in the city, and as he's entering in the city, he's giving out the spoils of war. And so it's not just him who has benefited from winning the war, but actually all of those who align themselves with him that will benefit. They will share in the spoil. And so we think about this, right? Jesus, we go, as he ascended, that's a victory. And as he leaves, that's the victory. The victory on the cross, the victory of the resurrection, the victory of the ascension. And as he goes, what he does is he gives the gifts away. He didn't necessarily need to give the gifts away when he was here because he was all of them. The unity was in him. He had everything, and he was training them. But then as he goes, it says that he gives the spoils away. And we see this in the early church. He gives the spoils away. And I love this. And it talks about he who ascends, but do we not know that he descended because he couldn't ascend unless he first descended? And it sounds kind of weird when you read it because it's like he ascended, but he descended, and he couldn't have ascended unless he descended first because he's the one who descends and then he ascends. You're like, okay, I got it. Like there's a bunch of descending and ascending. But actually, it's a key Christian doctrine. One of the things that we believe as Christians is that Jesus stepped down out of heaven. He descended, and then he was here for 30 some odd years, died on the cross, resurrected, and then ascended. Now you may think, well, yeah, of course, but not everybody believes that. In fact, there's actually a portion of people in this world that love Jesus, that think Jesus is great, but they just believe that all he did was ascend. In other words, that he became God. Or like if you are in Christ, one day you too will ascend. But you never descended. And so what he's saying here is that this is the Jesus who descended. In other words, he stepped down out of heaven. And just like at the risk of stating the obvious, stepping down out of heaven and down into this world, that was not an upgrade. He wasn't, that's why he's stepping down. You know, if you ever go to like a memorial service and people are mourning the person who has just passed, but what do they say? They say, well, he's in a better place now. She's in a better place. She's with the angels, or he's with the angels. Better place now. But that's because we believe that heaven's a better place. I mean, I picture when Jesus was here on earth, people were like, the angels were up in heaven going, hey, where's Jesus? He goes, oh, he's in a worse place now. He's in a worse place. He stepped down. Which is interesting because we live in such a world. Truth be told, I mean, other than Scripture, I think we're actually more comfortable with a Jesus who only ascends and never descends. Because we like that idea, almost like Jesus did a really good job here, and then he got promoted to God's status, or he got promoted, then he got lifted up. The problem is, well, lots of things, but one, that's not what the Bible teaches. It's very problematic for you, by the way, and for me, to follow a Jesus who descends first, so that he may be lifted up. And by the way, lifted up, we also mean on the cross, and then ascended. It's interesting because we live in a world right now that's all about upward mobility. I mean, we think about upward mobility. What's my trajectory? Upward mobility? And even with the world, as we think, as in our culture, even as we even talk about this idea about even equality, it's this idea of like, how can everybody achieve upward mobility? Which is actually, by the way, a great question to ask and something we should wrestle with. How can people have access? How can everybody have access to upward mobility? But let us not forget that we follow a Jesus who actually seems to take the path of downward mobility. In other words, he stepped down to lift people up. I mean, I think this is what we see in the scriptures. This idea of like biblical equality. It's like I lower myself so that I can lift other people up. He who ascended, don't forget that he first descended. And so then he goes on in verse 11 and says this: and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Let me read that again. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, the teachers, to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And so he says he gave apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers, but for a reason. And the reason is this, is he goes, it's for the equipping. It's for the equipping of the church. So even think about this. Why would you come here or be online and listen to a sermon for probably 45 minutes? I'll tell you why. Because I think what you're hoping for and what I'm hoping to accomplish is I want to equip you. I want you to be equipped. This is why that's why people tell me what I need to do. What does the Bible say? How do I need to apply this? What does this mean to me? How am I equipped? But not just the equipping of so that I know more, or not just the equipping so that I know how to argue my faith better, or not just the equipping so that I tithe. But this is actually equipping, this is what he says, equipping for the ministry. In other words, God has given you a ministry. Part of my job, or the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, the teachers' job, is to equip you for that ministry. And that ministry, which always sounds super mysterious, right? Oh, it's ministry. But I go, really, it's just the building up of the body. And I would even classify, for the most part, generally speaking, anything you do to build up the body is classified as ministry. Yeah, so when people are like, well, it's not ministry unless it's like an official church ministry. I'm like, did you build up the body? Yeah, I met with somebody over coffee and encouraged them. That's ministry. I read scripture over them. Good, that's ministry. I prayed with them. That's ministry. Took care of the budget. That's ministry. It's building up the body. Try to figure out how to stream online. Good, that's ministry. Why? That's the building up of the body. And so he says, actually, the prophets, the evangelists, the apostles, the shepherds, the teachers, all of them, they're given to you for a very specific purpose, which is to build up the body. And so this idea that God has called us to unity but really has given us different ways. So I'm going to take out the word ministry for a second, but he's given us different ways to build up the body. The way you build up the body is different than the way that I build up the body. But as Paul is saying is that they're all important. And what you bring to the table is different than what I bring to the table, but everything that everybody brings to the table, a couple things. One, everybody has a spot at the table, and everything that everybody brings to the table is for what? Is to build up the church and then to move us towards unity. I've now been in ministry, paid ministry, so on staff at a church for 20 years, which sounds borderline ridiculous. But in January of 2000 is when I went on staff at church. And before that, I had served at a church for just a year as just basically like a Sunday school teacher, and then straight into staff. And for the first 5 years of my ministry career, I was a youth pastor. Many of you know that. And that means that the last about 15 years or so, I've been a lead pastor, and more specifically here. I've only been a lead pastor here at Northside Church. But it's interesting, in my first 5 years of ministry, people would ask me, so Josh, like, when do you plan on being a lead pastor or a senior pastor? I go, oh, I've got no plans for that. I mean, really what they're doing, what they're asking is like, so when are you going to grow up and be a real pastor? I mean, it's fun that you're playing with the students, and that's cool, and you're slinging Jello at each other, and you're going to camps, and you're having lock-ins. Isn't that great? But when do you think that you'll grow up and be a real pastor? That's I'm filling in the blanks there for a second. And I just thought like the same thing all the time, but give them the same answer. I go, I don't know. I don't know if I ever will. I said, when God gives me a voice more, if I want to speak more on behalf of the larger church than I do just the students, when God starts to change that heart is the day in which I think maybe he's calling me to be a lead pastor. But right now, all I think about is students. About how do we reach students? How do we build up students? How do we bring them into the faith? How do we raise them up in the faith? How do we connect them? How do we equip them? And so if somebody would come to me at that time and go, Josh, how do we equip these people over here? How do we engage the older people in our congregation? I go, I don't know. Send them some high school students or something? I don't know. I mean, that's what I know. I would look through the church through the lens of youth ministry. And I said, and when God starts to change my heart for that, and I start to look at the church through the lens of the larger picture, that's how I'll know. And about 4 years into that journey is that I started thinking like, this is how it just started. If I was pastoring a church, this is what I would do. I was like, oh, that's a new thought. Because before everything else was like, here's what I would do with the students. Here's what I would do with the students. But then I started thinking things of like, if I was a pastor, I would do this. And then what God did is that he began to grow that. He began to grow that. And it's interesting is that when I became a lead pastor, then people maybe would come to me and say, Josh, do you know what we need to do as a church? And I would say, no. What is it that we need to do as a church? And they would say, we need to do this. And I would go, and fill in the blank, And I'd go, that is a great idea. That's a really great idea. I think you should do that. And no. I don't mean like me per se. I mean like us as a church, and probably more specifically, I would like you to do this as a church. I go, no, because here's the thing. I didn't even think of that until you said something. I mean, that wasn't even on my radar until you said something. And so you know what that tells me about you? And some of us, by the way, we've had this conversation. So you're like, yeah, we actually had this conversation once, Josh. Like, yeah, because it goes, you know what that tells me about you? Is that God has put something on your heart, a way to build up this church in unity, a ministry. Because I didn't even think about that. And now what I want to do is I want to help equip you. I want to help encourage you. I want to help empower you, but I want you In fact, actually the worst thing that I could do is actually rob you, going back to verse 7, to rob you of that grace. I don't want to rob you of the grace. I don't want to steal Jesus' gift from you. And by the way, this isn't just the pastor trying to pull some sort of trickery on you. Like, I see what you did there. No, actually this is what Paul is saying, right? It's a gift given to you by Jesus. And it's my job to equip you. And so if what I do is I take that from you and I'm stealing that from you. And so what I want you to do is I want you to be then a voice for those things. And so for 5 years, I was the voice for youth ministry in the churches that I would work with. Everything I did, I looked through the lens of youth ministry. How does this affect the students? How does this affect junior hires? How does this affect high school students? How does this affect them? I was the voice. But the problem is that I expected everybody else to be as passionate about the youth as I was. And so I would say, well, yeah, it's all about the students. It's all about not just the next generation, but they're this generation. And we need to train them. We need to equip them. We need to reach them. And somebody else would say, well, yeah, but I don't think it's all about the youth. I'm going to go, do you not love Jesus? Is that the problem? I mean, do you not see the importance of this? And interesting is that I expected everybody to be as passionate about the youth ministry as I was. And the truth is that there was probably in those churches nobody more passionate about the youth than I was. That's why I was the youth pastor. And the tension became when I expected everybody else to act the same way. And this is what happens a lot of times, sometimes in churches with a lead position or other positions, is they expect everybody to be as passionate as they are. And just from my experience in 15 years, there is a tension sometimes to be you got to be 100% about small groups. Oh, by the way, you also have to be 100% about evangelism, and 100% about discipleship, and 100% about missions. And you go, that's a whole lot of 100%. I don't think I can do all of those 100%. Some of you guys may or may not know this, but several years ago now, as I was thinking about the church, and I thought we're just not that involved with missions. And I know now we're actually heavily involved with missions, but we just weren't. We just kind of did the church thing here. We did some local stuff. Well, we did nothing really either regionally or globally about missions. And so we want to change that. And so then I grabbed, at the time, Sean Cole and Phil Dirksen. Some of you guys know those names. Some of you do not know those names. But Sean Cole and Phil Dirksen, both of them have had experience. One of them, Sean and Jessica Cole, they're our missionaries now in Israel. And so with that is that, with that is that I said, would you guys, I just get the two of them together, brought them together. I said, hey, would you guys do me a favor? Would you guys be the voice of missions for this church? We need to increase our volume with missions. And would you look at the church through the lens of missions? And I said, because to be honest, I think for me, I love missions. I do love missions, but that's not what I think about in the morning. When I wake up, I think about in the morning? I think about Sunday mornings, and I think about sermons. I think about preaching, because I think one of the things that God has called me to do is to preach in this time of my life. And so when I get up in the morning, that's what I think about. And I need somebody else to be thinking about missions, about the voice of missions. And so both Sean and Phil did a wonderful job. And they started coming to me all right, if we're going to do missions, we need to move in this direction. We got to do these sorts of things. And they increased their volume. And they strengthened our body. And that wasn't because I all of a sudden became 100% about it. But that's because they were the voice of this. And so it's interesting what we often do, the way that we achieve unity in our world today with churches, is we go find churches that have similar passions as we do. Oh, worship. I'm super passionate about worship. I'm going to find a church that's all about worship, all about worship, all about worship. And I go, okay, that's good, I guess, but maybe, just maybe, you're actually supposed to be the voice of worship in a church that doesn't value it as much. I'm going to go find a church that's all about missions, all about missions. All they do is missions and missions and missions. I go, that's great, but maybe you're supposed to be a voice in a church that doesn't do so much with missions. And I think a lot of the times the way that we have found unity in our larger church today is we have just gone to find churches that have the same passions that we do. And in that, what we end up with is not unified churches, but this monochromatic church. In fact, actually, you can even look and listen to church and go, that's a mission church. That's an evangelism church. That's a worship church. And it could just be because everybody wanted to feel comfortable with their voices. They just aligned with people that sounded a lot more like them. And what Paul says is that you're very different. You've been equipped differently, but don't be a monochromatic, one-dimensional church. And he says this until we attain the unity of knowledge. In other words, once you guys attain the unity and the knowledge of the Son, once you guys have attained those two things, you're done. I go, oh, so I only have to equip you until we attain the unity and the knowledge of the Son. And you only have to do your ministry until we have all attained the unity and the knowledge of the Son. The fact that I'm still trying to equip you and the fact that you're still trying to do these sorts of things tells me that we haven't reached this yet. In other words, we're in the process still. He goes on, verse 14, a verse that has zero relevance today, sarcastically. He says, so this is the reason why we do that, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Let me read that again. So that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. And so he says, may you never be children. No longer like children. Children who quickly change directions and are easily tricked. You ever seen kids that change directions super quick? Oh, yeah. Like, hey, we're going to play this. Like, all right, we're all in. Let's play this. Now we're going to play this. Okay, we're changing directions now. That's one of the reasons why you don't really let kids lead, right? Sometimes it's like they're just boom, boom, ping pong, changing directions and easily tricked. One thing I learned about kids, having nieces and nephews, lots of them, they're easily tricked. It's easy to trick them. The older they get, the harder it is, right? When they're a little kid, peekaboo's easy enough. Peekaboo. Oh, you're there. Then you hide again. Like, where did he go? I have no clue where he went. And then peekaboo. Oh, he's back. Okay. All right. So but then they get older, right? And then the peekaboo starts. You got to up the trickery, right? But actually, the changing of directions and being easily tricked are two things of immaturity of children. You know, this idea in the Bible about chaff and oak trees. Chaff is the casing around wheat that's got no weight, no value. And the idea, the way that you would separate the wheat from the chaff is that you crush it to break it off, and then you just throw it up in the air, and a light breeze just takes the chaff away. And the Bible consistently is like, don't be like that. Be like an oak tree. Be like an oak tree. Although the wind, a strong wind, will have its effect on the tree, but that tree, unless it's super old, I guess, that tree's not going anywhere. The leaves will rustle, but that tree is not going to be moved. I once was talking with somebody, and they're trying to tell me about how much they've grown, and they're like, yeah. So I just go wherever the wind takes me. I'm like, and they thought like that's a good thing. I thought like, oh no, that's chaff talk. And that's bad conversation. And so what he's saying here is, don't be easily moved. And don't be easily tricked. There are people that are trying to deceive you. And I think right here he's getting at this idea of natural. There's other men and women that are trying to deceive you, and supernatural. There's other spirits trying to deceive you. And whether they're men and women trying to deceive you, or they are spirits trying to deceive you, don't be deceived. This is what he says, right? Don't be tossed to and fro, right? Taking on every sort of new doctrine. He says, carried about by every wind of doctrine. This idea of doctrine, this belief about God, beliefs about God. One of the things they teach you in seminary is to be very cautious about new doctrines. Walk super slowly with these new big ideas about who God is and how he works and what he does. And you go, why? You go, well, know this, that the Bible has been around for thousands of years. Thousands of years. Obviously, the Old Testament around a lot longer than the New Testament. New Testament around 2,000 years. And in those thousands of years, there have been thousands of men and women that are much smarter than you, much smarter than me, that have been poring over this for thousands of years. Thousands of years, thousands of people have been poring over this to find things true about God. So that if in 2020 you say, hey, hold on, I think that there's something that those thousands of people have missed over those thousands of years, the seminary profs would say, you walk carefully there. You're smart, but you're not that smart. I mean, God does new things. He reveals new things, but to think that over the thousands of years, thousands of people have missed this thing, you walk carefully there. In fact, actually, one of the interesting things about seminary is you would go, I got a thought, and you'd ask your professor, you go, yeah, what about this? He goes, oh, that's a good thought. You go, that's what I thought. He goes, also the same thought held by this person in 300, this person in 550, this person in 750 and 850, and let me walk you out your thought. You go, oh, Ecclesiastes, there really is nothing new under the sun, is there? So you be careful about the new doctrines, things that are true about God. And he goes, and this trickery, these schemes, you be careful about those too. In other words, there are people trying to manipulate you. There are things trying to manipulate you. Some of those are going to be natural. Some of those are going to be supernatural. But you need to have your guard up. If there's one thing that I think we could all be better at, is that we could be better at having our guard up. Because here's what happens actually. We talked about that chasm, the canyon. Is actually a lot of times what we do is we put our guard up. We're cautious with people that are on the other side of this topic. To go, well, they're totally being manipulated. They're totally being manipulated. They don't even see it. They are falling hook, line, and sinker. And so your guard is up for the other side, but when it comes to your side, the guard goes down. What's going on over there? Manipulation, trickery, cunningness, hook, line, and sinker. What's happening on your side? Well, on my side is the objective search for truth, really, and it's altruistic. I mean, nobody's got the motives. I go, no. I mean, hear me on this. You're being manipulated too. And there's one thing that's happened, especially the last several years, is that I go like my guard has gone up everywhere. And that's actually that's a tiring thing. I read a news story, no matter the website, my guard goes up. I see a link on Facebook, my guard goes up. Which is one of the reasons why I love Scripture, because Scripture is the place where my guard can finally come down. Oh, just let it come down. But we would be very naive if we thought the manipulation, the cunningness, the trickery was only happening on the other side. I'm going to submit to you that all of us, need to have our guard up. So maturity is this idea it's hard to be fooled, hard to be moved. Maturity brings with it the ability to accept that which is true and reject that which is false. And I thought if there's something that we need right now is just more mature Christians. Because when our guard goes down and we are tricked, we are manipulated, we buy into the propaganda, the divisions come to the church. And as we move into a culture that moves itself away from Christianity, our guards have got to go up more. And I don't care what website you go to. I don't care where you get your news. Your guard has got to go up. And this is what Paul says. Paul says mature Christians they're hard to move, hard to be fooled. And then he goes on to 5 and 16. Rather, so don't be like children who are easily moved and easily tricked. Don't be like that. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from the whole body joined together, held together by every joint with which it is equipped. When each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself in love. And so Paul says, instead of embracing falsehood, I want you to give away truth. Instead of embracing falsehood, would you give away truth? And by the way, this idea of speaking in truth, speaking the truth in love, this is a very popular thing right now. Like this idea of people go, speaking the truth. Because I go, nobody's speaking the truth in love. But we love to talk about the fact that we are speaking the truth in love. Well, I'm just saying, I'm speaking the truth in love. And I go, well, maybe not. If what you're doing with truth is just tearing somebody down, maybe you're more concerned with being right. But hear me on this. You can speak the truth in a wrong way and do damage. And I think this is why he says, I want you to speak the truth in love. Love, this idea of seeking the spiritual good of another. Isn't this what we learned as kids, but somehow we lost sight of this as adults? You can't say anything nice. But here's the thing about speaking the truth in love. Speaking the truth in love is not just saying things with a smile on your face. I think you stink. I think you're an idiot. That is not speaking. I'm just speaking the truth. And it was in love because I had a smile on my face. And I really care about the person. Not what speaking the truth in love is. Speaking, we talk about love. Love is like so this idea that seeking the spiritual good of another. Even if that comes a great sacrifice for you. So we speak the truth. We say the truth. I don't even mean true facts. I think what he's talking about here is he's talking about God's truth. I speak God's truth in love. This is not like my feelings, my thoughts, my hobby horses, my political views. I want to speak the truth, which is one of the reasons why even when I preach, I want to stay close to the Bible because this is true. My views, not so much sometimes. This is truth. And when I speak to you, when I preach, I want to speak this truth in love. And the way for my own purposes I put this, when I think about a Sunday morning and preaching, I think I speak the truth in a way that it's most likely to be heard, understood, received, and applied. So you heard me, things like, how's my diction? Can you hear the words that I am saying? If I was speaking if I lived in another country, I would have to learn the language to speak the truth in love because I would only speak the truth in English. And so, heard, understood. Do you see how I get to where I got? Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, you may actually hear what I'm saying, understand what I'm saying, and reject it. But my goal is that you would receive it. Will I put this truth in a way in which you're most likely to receive it? And then apply it. Do something with it. And so, this is why it's difficult to speak the truth in love. Because that takes a lot of work. And that changes on a person-by-person basis. I mean, sometimes when I'm speaking the truth in love, and I know somebody that's like, they're just super direct, and I just gotta put it direct. I'm like, well, I love you, brother, but you're being an idiot. Like, yeah, no, I know. But if I said that same thing to somebody else, it would crush their spirits. And so to somebody else, I may have to say, well, you know, a couple of decisions that you made, there's a chance, a possibility, maybe. Think about this. Maybe, possibly, that some of the decisions that you made probably weren't the best that you could have done. And even then, like, oh, but what are you saying? Like, so. But what I'm trying to put this, I want to put this in a way, and it's really hard because this is going to be a person-to-person basis. By the way, this is why speaking the truth in love almost never happens on social media. Because you can't craft that. And hear me on this. I have yet to have somebody sit in my office and go, hey, so what happened? What turned it around? Like, well, I'll tell you what turned it around. I was on Facebook, scroll, and then I was like, this guy's right. I got to change my life. She was speaking like mad truth, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got it all wrong. Like, that never happens, but I'll tell you what does happen. Conversations, relationships. What happened? A brother came to me. A sister came to me, and it was very hard, but God had said, I want you to speak these things to them. And so they wrestled with it, they wrestled with God, and they finally spoke. And so what Paul says, I want you to speak the truth in love. It's interesting because we actually almost always have a negative view of this. So when someone says, I got to speak the truth in love, it's like, I got to say something hard that I don't know if you're going to hear it, and so I'm going to put it in the best way possible. But actually, I think there's a far greater positive aspect to this. And hear me on this, it's like probably some of the most formative areas of my life where people have spoken into my life and spoke the truth in love was actually even places of correction, but actually places of encouragement. When people have spoken, for the most part, the formative places in my life, when people have spoken the truth in love, it wasn't actually even a moment of correction. It was a moment of encouragement. They were telling me actually something that I knew to be true. I just didn't believe it. And so I've had people come to me and come to you and say, I'm going to speak the truth in love, and God hasn't forgotten you. That's the truth in love, by the way. God sees you. God loves you. God cares for you. God knows you. God suffers with you. God sees the injustice with you. That's the truth in love, by the way. That too. What he says is, when this happens, it's joined together and then it's held together. Not only has the body then come together when the people are carrying out their ministry in their diversity, doing it different ways, it's the only way that it can come together. And when it comes together, it's joined together and then it's held together. Joined and held. Now, for those of you guys who are married or who have been married, you know that the joining together is far easier than the holding together. Right? It's easy to join together. It's easy to say it's easy to go to a wedding. It's easy to have a wedding. It's hard to have a marriage. What is that? It's easy to join together. It's hard to hold together. And what Paul is saying here, I think he's even getting at this. The joining together, yeah, you're joined together, but then you hold together too. And by the way, the holding is harder. This idea, then he goes, of unity. This unity is this diversity and unity. And what we get is this reminder that we need each other. Held together. Joined together and held together. With the common goal of Christ-likeness and growing up in love. I love that. The Christ-likeness and the growing up in love, they can't be separated. The more we look like Christ, the more we grow in love. And so, when you think about this idea of unity and diversity, I want you, you think about this. What is the voice that God has given you? And I want that voice to be heard in this community. And some of you guys have very different voices. I know that. I've listened to you. And that's good. And then you trust the community with that voice. One of my youth pastor friends who was thinking about becoming a senior pastor had asked me, he says, Josh, what's the transition like? What's it like? You made the jump. What's it like? And I said, it's just different. There's some things about youth ministry I really do miss. There's just some sweetness about that I really, really do miss. Students seem to be more sold out. They're just they haven't found their rut yet. And so you get to help form that. I said, but I think for me is that there were things, the decisions that lead pastor Josh made that frustrated youth pastor Josh. And so this idea that I heard that youth pastor voice, but I'm thinking about the larger church now. And so it wasn't just about the youth ministry voice that I listened to for so long and just did whatever it said. Is now I was thinking about this choir. Are all of the voices singing together? Are they working together? And sometimes, as the lead pastor, I'd have to say, you know what? I think you're singing a little too loud over there. And if you could just bring us in, and this beautiful choir, all singing the same song, different octaves, same notes. Maybe even different parts of the song, different lyrics in the song, but we're all singing the same song. And we're working together in diversity, in our unity. Our voices are being heard, but at the same time, they're finding the synthesis with the other voices. And when that happens, I think it's what Paul happened. The body comes together, it's joined together, it holds together, and it ceases to be a monochromatic, one-dimensional church, but a body that is carrying out and representing Christ well. As Christ is the head, built up in love. That's what the world needs. That's what we need.